So in detailed Bible study, Torah study, Jews dig deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into the text. And the logic behind that is the idea that the text comes from God and that basically it's infinitely deep and there's an infinite amount of information in there. And the way we get a better understanding of God is by digging into the text. So, of course, we read it carefully to understand the story, but that's at a surface level. And then we're going to dig deeper and deeper and deeper. So I think for the last few weeks, I think the last 2 weeks, we've been studying the story of Joseph. And Joseph is a fascinating story. It's the longest single narrative in the Hebrew Bible, certainly in the Torah, first 5 books of the Bible. And as I mentioned here, it's the longest narrative in the Quran, the holy book of Muslims. And we started out with a wonderful story that I first came across in the Quran, which was poor Mrs. Potiphar. You remember the story, basically. Mrs. Potiphar has the hots for Joseph. And so she tries to seduce him, and he refuses and runs off. And then she calls folks and said he tried to attack me, and poor Joseph gets sent to jail. That's the short and slightly G-rated or PG-rated version of the story. We looked at other levels of raciness in this story. But one which got me interested is a story that poor Mrs. Potiphar is trying to explain to her friends why she couldn't resist Joseph. And the Bible describes Joseph as one of the few men who are very good looking and handsome and shapely. And so Mrs. Potiphar throws a party for her friends and has Joseph come in while they're peeling fruit with a knife. And the women are so taken with how beautiful Joseph is that they're cutting themselves with the knife. And so Mrs. Potiphar says, if you couldn't control your hands with Joseph at a distance, if you only seen him once, how am I supposed to control myself when he's in my house every day? And I saw this in the Quran, and I said, this has to be also a Jewish midrash. And sure enough, it is a Jewish midrash. A Jewish midrash is a story that the rabbis developed to explain things going on in the Bible. So we actually studied that to a fair degree in the last 2 sessions. And now there's another problem going on here. And the problem is, well, again, just continuing with the story. So Joseph's thrown in jail. Joseph seems to succeed wherever he goes. So he becomes a favorite of the jailer. And into jail come 2 servants of Pharaoh, a baker and a wine steward. And they have dreams. And Joseph, says, well, God has given me the ability to interpret dreams. And for the baker, he interprets his dream that Pharaoh is going to behead him shortly, like on his birthday, on Pharaoh's birthday. I think that's the story. I don't know if that's actually in the Bible or maybe it's in Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. But the wine steward, he predicts that Pharaoh is going to elevate him. And sure enough, those dreams turn out to be true. And then one day, Pharaoh's having some really strange dreams. And the wine steward reports to Pharaoh that there's a Hebrew prisoner who's really good at interpreting dreams. And Joseph interprets the dreams to say there are 7 years of bumper crops coming, and they will be followed by 7 years of famine. And basically, what we need is someone who can do the planning so Egypt can survive these events. And of course, Pharaoh puts Joseph in charge. So Joseph is now being elevated, in effect, to the role of prime minister of Egypt. And along with that, Joseph is given a wife, and her name is Asnath. And he has 2 sons with Asnath, and the sons become Manasseh, are named Manasseh and Ephraim, and they become heads of tribes. So this causes a problem to the rabbis. Can anybody guess what the problem is for the rabbis in this
They're
story?
not Jewish.
Right. And why are they not Jewish?
The mother.
Well,
The
let's use
mother is
complete
not Jewish.
sentences. They are not Jewish because their mother is not Jewish. In Jewish law today, you are Jewish if your mother is Jewish. Nothing else matters. Okay? Because Judaism is both a people that you are born into and a religion that anyone can become part of. And several people, even here on this screen, are either have been converted to Judaism or in the process of converting to Judaism. So the question is, did Asnath convert, or what's going on with that story? So I'll first, Les, you have your hand up.
Back then, wasn't it patriarchal where if the father was Jewish, the children were Jewish?
Yeah, so we're going to read about that, and that's
Okay.
actually the first article really focuses on that question of 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 the difference between who is a Jew in in biblical times, and then the rabbis changing that, and we're going to discuss the reason for why, both as it's mentioned in the article, and then also I will add some things because this is something that I also am very interested in. So I trust you can. Whoops. Let's see if I can find you guys again. I trust you can see this. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I'm going to ask if anyone other than Joanne, who read last time, would like to do a little reading, and if there are no volunteers, we'll call on Joanne again.
I can.
Okay, thanks, Henry.
Okay, Joseph and Asnath, the question of conversion. Do the stories of the Torah hold true today? And that's from the Jerusalem Post article. Okay, the Torah tells us that Pharaoh, after Joseph's elevation to viceroy of Egypt, gave the Hebrew an Egyptian name and an Egyptian wife. The matter of the name, Zeph,
Um, I think it's
Zephanath,
Zephaniah Paneah.
has not bothered Jews throughout the ages. The issue of Joseph's wife, however, remains controversial. She was Asnath, the daughter of Potipharah. Potipharah happened to be the priest of an idolatrous cult that worshipped the Egyptian sun god Ra in the city of
Heliopolis.
Heliopolis. All right. There is not a word in the Torah about Asnath abandoning idolatry and converting to the Jewish faith. Before the years of famine that Joseph had predicted in interpreting Pharaoh's dreams, Asnath gave birth to Manasseh and Ephraim. Centuries later, Ephraim was the main tribe that ruled over Israel, the northern kingdom. Despite being born of an Egyptian daughter of a pagan priest, Ephraim and Manasseh were full-fledged Israelites. Asnath did not go through a conversion course and did not immerse herself in a mikveh before marrying Joseph. This should not bother us. The Torah world is a world of tribes. The identity of the father determined the tribal identity of his sons and daughters. Once a woman married into the tribe, she adopted the religion of the husband. Asnath did not have to smash her idols. Iconoclasm was not required to enter the faith of her husband.
So I'll just mention this immersion in a mikvah. A mikvah, for those that may not know, this is a ritual body of water. It's kind of like a baptism, and part of a conversion is immersion in a mikvah. But it's making a point here, which I think they're going to amplify. Basically, in biblical times, in temple times, uh, Israel, the nation Israel, was a collection of tribes. There were 12 tribes, and it was a tribal body, um, and a tribal amalgamation. And basically, your tribe was the tribe of your father. And interestingly, this continues today. Even in rabbinic Judaism, there is the question of who is in the tribe of the Kohanim. Basically, you have 12 tribes, one of which are the Levites. And in the Levites, you have two groups. You have the regular Levites, and then you have a special subgroup of Levites who are Kohens or priests. Levites are sort of helpers to the priests. And the Kohens trace their lineage back to Moses's brother Aaron, who is the first high priest. So, and even today, your tribe, whether you're a Kohen, a Levite, or an Israelite, depends only on your father's status. It doesn't have anything to do with your mother's status. So the tribe goes with your father, and in ancient times, the question of what was your religion was a meaningless question, because you adopted the religion of your nation or of your tribe. The example I always use is actually Egypt. If you asked an Egyptian, "What's your religion?" the Egyptian wouldn't know what you were talking about. They would say, "Oh, do you mean what's my favorite god?" And so here's a group that worship Ra, the sun god. I can relate to that. Sonia and I are off to Puerto Vallarta tomorrow for about 9 or 10 days, and I guarantee you from afar it will look like we are worshiping Ra, the sun god. Okay, so Henry, you want to continue with her children?
Sure. Her children bear the identity of Israelites because their father is an Israelite. It is as simple as that. Centuries later, however, the question of Joseph marrying the daughter of a priest of Ra without her renunciation of idolatry troubled many Jews. There was little left of the tribal system. The Levites and the Kohanim priests still served in the Second Temple, and the term Judaism developed in the Hellenistic world as more and more pagans wanted to join the Jewish people. The reality of conversion had to go beyond the simple declaration of the biblical Ruth that she would follow Naomi and her people. Conversion to Judaism, as we know it today, develops more than 2,000 years ago. The beginning of the reevaluation of Asnath's marriage to Joseph began in Alexandria, a city with a Jewish population of 250,000. Hellenized Jews were not turncoats. They took Greek genres,
Genres, yeah.
philosophy, history, the epic poem, and applied those genres to biblical themes and narratives.
Yeah, so what we're going to see is
Alexandria,
what's going on is how the Israelites changed their character in late Second Temple times, like 2,000 years ago. I believe Alexandria is before the destruction of the Second Temple, and certainly the period of Hellenization. I mean, we know about the Maccabees and so on. And Judaism is going to be very much influenced by Greek culture. In fact, still is to this day. You may not know this, but synagogue is a Greek word, and so too that's going to happen on the question of conversion and the question of what's really going on in the Joseph story. So let's continue, Henry.
Alexandria's Jewish intellectuals adopted as well the genre of the Greek novella. One Jewish author, so bothered by the Torah's description of the daughter of a pagan priest marrying Joseph without a mention of her embracing Israelite monotheism, composed a novella in Greek titled Joseph and Asnath. In the updated story, Asnath refuses to marry any man but the son of Pharaoh. She refuses to have anything to do with a Hebrew slave, despite the fact that he was now viceroy of Egypt. But things change when Asnath sees Joseph from the window of her palace in Heliopolis.
Heliopolis. Yeah, so Helio
Heliopolis,
refers to the sun. So this is apparently a part of town that worships the sun god, Ra.
It is love at first sight. Asnath loves the handsome Joseph and wants to marry him. At first, the righteous Joseph refuses to have anything to do with the privileged worshiper of idols. But as described by historian Eric S. Gruen, Asnath grasped at the hope and turned her religious life around at a stroke. Much weeping and wailing ensued as she repented of former heresies, removed all false idols from her home, and fell to fasting and mourning, self-flagellation and humiliation, uttering desperate prayers to her newly found God, seeking forgiveness for past sins and rescue from the fury of spurned divinities. Later, an angel makes a dramatic appearance, assuring Asnath that she has chosen the right path and should prepare to marry Joseph.
Okay. Now, I want to again point out that this is a Greek novella. It's not part of the Bible, to my knowledge. Actually, I never heard of it until I read these articles. It's not part of any organized Jewish midrash, but it's a response to this question: how is it that Joseph could marry a pagan and his sons still be heads of tribes?
The anonymous author of the novella is embarrassed and troubled by the Torah's omissions. He can't believe that Joseph the righteous would not demand of his wife to destroy her idols, her past, and turn her back on the worship of the sun god. While the Torah is not troubled by Joseph's marriage to Asnath, even hailing the Pharaoh as the matchmaker, the author of Joseph and Asnath is living in a radically different post-tribal Jewish world and cleans up the amount to
The
conform to the
account.
reality of Judaism that would appeal to Jews and pagans alike. Would account, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
So much of rabbinic midrash is devoted to the same goal of looking back at Abraham, Joseph, and Moses, and to see them as forerunners of the rabbis and their formulation of halakha, Jewish law. I don't condemn this creativity. It enriches the Torah's accounts, but it is often unnecessary. Interpretation is the lifeblood of Judaism, and in each generation there will be a different take on a text that is relevant to the interpreter and our people.
Yeah, so another example of this, which occurs to me, is if you remember the story of Abraham, where he is visited by three men who we later find out are possibly three angels or two angels and God. And Abraham, being a master of hospitality, you know, orders orders his wife, orders his servants to go bring a kid, a calf, and and to serve the calf with milk curds and so on. And so the rabbis, some rabbis are disturbed by the fact that he's serving milk with meat. Now, from the standpoint of the Torah isn't concerned about that at all, because the prohibition against milk and meat is not going to come until, much later. But there's a tradition in Judaism, in interpretation, that there's no before and after. So the rabbis say, well, of course they ate either the milk first and then the meat, which is permissible, or they ate the meat and then waited 4 to 6 hours before having the milk. So, Amaris, you have your hand up. Oh, we can't hear you, and you're not muted, so I don't know why we can't hear you. We did hear you before.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, hear you now. Go ahead. Oh, now you're frozen.
Like what does that mean?
No, now we hear you. It's just the speed of your internet connection.
Oh.
So, did you have a
what
question? Amaris, we lost you again. We can't hear you. Sorry. I'm not sure what. My guess is I don't know what you're doing. What?
Maybe she should type it into the chat.
No, can't hear you. So we're going to suggest you type the question into the chat if you can, or a comment. I'm not sure why. My guess is if you look in your microphone and the choice of microphone, you need to connect with the right one, because it's going in and out. But I'm going to go back to the text, and then we'll come back to Amaris. Okay, so let's continue, Henry, at conversion in Judaism.
Okay. Conversion to Judaism, as we know it today, is rabbinic in origin.
What that means is it's worth just mentioning that. So the rabbis, before the destruction of the temple, biblical Judaism, is a religion that focuses on sacrifice in the temple. That's biblical Judaism. Once the temple is destroyed, you can't have biblical Judaism anymore. The rabbis literally reformed Judaism into a very different religion, which we call rabbinic Judaism, which focuses on Jewish law and prayer and study of sacred materials. So that's what we mean by rabbinic in origin. Okay? Let's continue. Before the first century?
Okay. Before the first century, around the time Joseph and Asnath was composed, the rabbis began to standardize the conversion process. According to historian Shay J.D. Cohen, there were many ways to cross the boundary to become a Jew. There are no texts from the Second Temple period that spell out a single set of practices that a Gentile must perform, or a single set of beliefs that a Gentile must accept if he is to be regarded as a Jew by other Jews. Circumcision aside, the boundary between Jew and Gentile was fluid and not clearly marked.
And I would say, even to this day, my understanding of Orthodox practice and law, now I don't know, maybe recent legal decisions is different, is that that a prospective convert needs to be taught of some of the major commandments, major mitzvot, and minor mitzvot. And then if the convert is a man, he should be circumcised. And if he's already circumcised, a drop of blood is drawn from the spot where the foreskin used to be. And then both men and women need to be immersed in a ritual bath or a mikvah. And of course, as the tradition has evolved, and I'm now working with several people studying for conversion, several people even on the screen, both studying and have gone through with conversion. And so typically it's a year-long study and an acknowledgement that your beliefs align with Jewish beliefs. So let's continue with the concern.
Okay. The concern that Athnos did not go through a process of conversion is irrelevant in tribal societies, whose men determine the religion of both wife and child. As for the mother determining the religious identity of the child, Cohen concludes that the matrilineal principle was not yet known in Second Temple times. There are many reasons the rabbis adopted matrilineal descent, ranging from the uncertainty of paternity to the influence of Roman law. The question of Ephraim and Manasseh's Israelite identity cannot be measured with the rabbinic yardstick.
Yeah, so I mean, what they clearly mean there is by rabbinic law, by the law that we have now, Ephraim and Manasseh would not be Jewish, and certainly couldn't be heads of tribes. But in tribal times and in temple times, that question would not even arise. Okay, let's continue, Henry. We can legitimately.
Okay. We can legitimately discuss the existence of rabbinic Judaism without erasing the continuity from Sinai to the rabbis. At the same time, because of changing circumstances such as exile, there is an element of revolution in both Midrash and Halakha. The anachronistic reading of the past is, in fact, quite creative and necessary. The Hebrew Bible is not a relic of the past because Jews have understood the text must be a living one. The heroism of the composer of Joseph and Asnath and the heroism of the rabbis afterwards was to breathe life into an ancient text and make it relevant for the world in which they live. The author is Rabbi of Congregation Ansei Shalom in West Palm Beach, Florida.
Okay. I'm going to stop sharing. There is one other article I found that we'll at least read the beginning of, and it covers something that actually, Henry, you brought to my attention, which is another, I suppose, fanciful interpretation of this, which traces Asnath's heritage back to Dinah, who is another one of Jacob's children, Jacob's only daughter. But I want to point out something which I never realized till I recently did some study on this question of patrilineal and matrilineal descent in Judaism. So again, Judaism is both a religion and a people. It is a people in that you are fully Jewish if your parents are Jewish. And that's true whether you know it or not. And, a great example of that is Madeleine Albright, who was President Clinton's Secretary of State. When she became Secretary of State and people started looking carefully at the story of her childhood and parents, they discovered that her parents were actually Jewish, and I think they converted to Christianity to escape anti-Semitism in Czechoslovakia during World War II. But because basically, since Judaism is a people, you can't get out. So they were Jewish, notwithstanding their conversion. So Madeleine Albright is fully Jewish, and her children are fully Jewish, as I always like to say, as Jewish as the chief rabbi of Jerusalem, even though it was only very late in life that she even learned about this. So you would say Judaism is a people, but Judaism is also a religion that anyone can convert to, even though you're not born into Judaism. You can convert to Judaism if you align your beliefs with that of Judaism. So that's important. So now the question is, why did Judaism become from the father's line to the mother's line, and then what happens to the in the world of Reform Judaism? So as a very quick overview, in Talmudic times, it switches from the father's line to the mother's line. And I always used to say, the real reason is you have to know whether you're Jewish or not. If you're Jewish, eating a ham sandwich is a sin. If you're not Jewish, eating a ham sandwich is lunch. And there is no such thing as being half Jewish. If you are half Jewish, does that mean you could eat half a ham sandwich? What does that mean? So you have to know whether you're Jewish or not. If you're Jewish, according to Judaism, you're subject to all kinds of rules of Judaism. So you have to know whether you're Jewish. And you may not know who your father is, but you always know who your mother is, because that's the person whose womb you came out of. And one of the oddities of Jewish law, which will astound, upset, and maybe fascinate some of you, is the womb is in control. So in modern times, when we have surrogate pregnancy, the question is, who's got the womb? So for example, imagine a Jewish couple, and the woman doesn't have a uterus that can support a pregnancy, but they fertilize an egg or several eggs. So they have embryos which are implanted into the womb of a non-Jewish woman. And the baby is born from the womb of the non-Jewish woman. According to Jewish law, that baby is not Jewish at all, even though the DNA, the genes are entirely Jewish. I don't know if that may change with the times as the rabbis really think about and understand surrogacy. But in Jewish law, it's the womb that counts. The Reform movement, because I would say one of the major elements of Reform Judaism is to, as much as possible, treat men and women equally, came up with a decision that the child of a Jew and a non-Jew will be presumed to be Jewish, and that presumption should be confirmed by raising the child Jewishly. So you have a situation which I run into all the time: Jewish father, non-Jewish mother. The Jewish the family joins a synagogue. In the Reform world, the child will be considered Jewish if the child is being raised Jewishly. But we also have a situation which may puzzle you as much as it can puzzle and confuse me, where you have a Jewish woman married to a non-Jewish man, but the child is not raised Jewishly at all. Now you have the strange situation where that child would be accepted as Jewish by Orthodox and conservative Jews, but in theory not accepted as Jewish by Reform Judaism. And ultimately, it's going to be up to the individual rabbis how he treats the family. But the question is why? And I came across actually a very logical explanation which will appeal to those of you who have sort of a legalistic or logical mindset. So here's the story. In Jewish law, a marriage can only take place between two Jews. Okay, everybody got that? You may not agree with it, but you understand it. A Jewish marriage takes place between two Jews. Cheryl, I'll have to take a look at that article later.
Yeah.
But you can let me know if there's something really compelling about it that we should be aware of.
I'm
So,
just looking at some responsa.
oh yeah, okay. So stay with me and focus on this because so if you have a marriage between two Jews, Jewish man, Jewish woman, there's no question the child is Jewish. Now suppose a woman has a child, but the woman is unmarried. Everybody with me? If that woman is Jewish, the child will be Jewish, right? If the woman is not Jewish and unmarried and has a child, the child will not be Jewish. This makes sense to everybody? So if you combine that logic with the logic that a marriage between a Jew and a non-Jew is not considered a marriage under Jewish law, then if you have a Jewish woman married to a non-Jewish man, she has a child. As far as Jewish law is concerned, she's not married at all. And of course, the child's Jewish. She's Jewish, the child's Jewish. If you have a non-Jewish woman married to a Jewish, put it this way, a non-Jewish woman who has a baby with a Jewish man, even though they've gone through, a marriage maybe conducted by me, or a justice of the peace or whomever, under Jewish law, that wouldn't be a marriage at all. And as far as Jewish law is concerned, this woman is an unmarried non-Jew having a baby. So of course, the baby is not Jewish. So this actually makes a great deal of sense to me. You might not agree with it, but it makes a great deal of sense. Any questions or comments or thoughts on that? Okay, so actually I want to look at the beginning of another article, which talks about this other idea about Joseph and Asnath. Les, you have a comment.
Yeah, I have a quick question. Is there any situation where a Jewish woman having a child is not Jewish? If they're married to a non-Jewish man, then they're not married. But is there any situation where a Jewish woman has a Jewish child, excuse me, and it's not considered Jewish?
I can't think of one. Can you think
Except
of?
if he's not raised, would reform if he's not raised as a Jewish boy? He would
Yeah.
not.
So this is the interesting question. So the Reform movement, and I think Cheryl put it in the chat. Actually, for some reason, I can't quite see the chat at the moment. I don't know why. Let's see if I can. Strange. Sometimes. There we go. There's a couple of things in the chat, so I don't know. Anyway, I'm not going to dwell on it. The Reform movement made the ruling a child of a Jew and a non-Jew is presumed to be Jewish if the child is raised Jewishly. And I think they even give examples like having a Jewish name, going to Hebrew school, having a bar mitzvah, confirmation, and so on. Importantly, my understanding is that this is the resolution of the CCAR, which is strictly North American Reform Judaism. I know that this idea is not accepted in Israel, and my understanding is it's not accepted in Europe either. I've heard people say it's not accepted in Canada. I really don't know about that. But you can have an example, Les, the actual example you're giving. And I personally have faced this. I have had a situation where somebody comes to me and says, we just found out my mother in her old age told us that she was Jewish, but it was a big, problem growing up and she never told anybody. It was hidden from the family. And so a person comes to me and says, what do I do? Am I Jewish? Can I convert to Judaism? And I point out to this, I'll point out to you, I will point out to this woman, if she went to an Orthodox or conservative rabbi, she would be considered Jewish. In theory, in the Reform movement, she shouldn't be because she was not raised Jewishly. But I have to say, I tend to be sympathetic in this regard, and I would tend to treat someone like this as being Jewish. And by the way, this idea of patrilineal descent, I would say is the most, I'm not sure I want to use the word destructive, it's the I think one of the most problematic things that Reform Judaism does, because 200-300 years from now, people won't necessarily remember that their great 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 grandparents entered Judaism through the Reform movement. And my own prediction, which I am confident that I will never see enacted, is that eventually the Orthodox and conservative world will have pro forma conversions at every birth, because the origin of the baby's Jewishness may well be suspect of all Jews. So they'll just, they'll dip the baby in water. They would have done a circumcision anyway. And so that's my prediction. It was a very long-winded answer. I don't know whether I addressed what you were asking.
No, you did great. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Henry.
Yeah, I just want to know did you see Amaris's comments in the chat? She had asked a couple of
So let me
questions.
take a look.
She had asked a couple of
What does it
questions.
mean when it speaks about angels? Yeah, so in Jewish tradition, I'm planning on teaching a class on angels, one of these classes. Thank you for asking. So the Hebrew word for angel is malach, and it's the same as the word for messenger. So in many places in the Hebrew Bible, you have a story like the one of Abraham I just told, where some people visit. So it says some men came and visited Abraham, and then in the next phrase or two, it'll say they were angels, and in the next phrase or two, they will say it was God. So in Judaism, there is angels and angelology, and as we get later past the Bible into this rabbinic Judaism, there's all kinds of wild stuff about angels. One of my favorite quotes about angels, which actually this is attributed to the Talmud, but it's still one of my favorites. I have it as a magnet. It says, every blade of, I can't read it like that. Every blade of grass has an angel that bends over it and whispers, grow, grow. I love that idea, that the world is just, overpopulated with angels controlling everything. But if you adopt the idea that God controls things, well, how does God control things? By somehow interacting with the world. I would say Jewishly, that interaction we would call angels. So that's a very elementary introduction to angelology, Amaris. Thank you for asking. I don't know if there were any other questions or anything. I'm not going to try and read what you just sent, Cheryl. But did anything pop out at you that you think is important?
Yeah, I mean, there's not really a lot of updated stuff on responsa. Some of this is very old,
Right.
but there's a recent article in law journals going over the differences between Israeli law of what they consider, Jewish and a surrogate, because it enters the question of, if you use a surrogate are they using their genetic material, or do you use your spouse's genetic material, but it becomes a surrogate, as they said in the article, wife? And
So the question is there's a different issue about artificial insemination and just pure surrogacy. So it is, as technology, one of the interesting things I would say about Jewish law is, as technology advances, we need to address how technology interacts with Jewish law. And that's certainly, that is the world of responsa.
And the last article goes on for 15 pages, because the article starts out that there's a Jewish law that you have to procreate. And
Right.
how do you do that mitzvah?
Yes, and there is a discussion. If it's the conservative movement, it's Elliot Dorff has written about this, that it's a commandment to procreate. So the question is, if you're unable to procreate, is it a sin that you're not procreating? And the response is no. If you're not able to do it, not doing something that you're not able to do is not a sin. Okay, so I'm going to read just the beginning of the next article, because I think it's really interesting. Whoops. Oh, I had it and I just closed it. Sorry. So this one is in Torah.com, and I think I'm going to read it because we're not going to read much of it. Joseph and Asnath. A text from Hellenistic Egypt, that's the one that was discussed in the last article, sometime around the first century BCE to the first century CE, tells a romantic story of Joseph and Asenath courtship. Initially, Asenath rejects Joseph, but then falls in love with him, only to have Joseph reject her because she's the daughter of an Egyptian priest. It's only after she repents and changes her allegiance to Israel's God that Joseph marries her. And that's kind of the story we just heard. And there she is. Oh, that's just a woman. It's not necessarily Asnath. So, yeah, this is an interesting midrash. When Pharaoh appoints Joseph as viceroy, he also gives him Asenath, daughter of an Egyptian priest, as a wife, quoting from Genesis. And Pharaoh gave him for a wife Asenath, daughter of Potipharah, priest of On. Thus Joseph emerged in charge of the land of Egypt. As a daughter of an Egyptian priest, Asenath would have worshipped Egyptian deities, not Joseph's God. Later, Jewish writers, unlike the biblical author, were troubled by this. As the mother of Ephraim and Manasseh, two future tribes of Israel, Asenath and her allegiance needed clarification. So here is a midrash. So first, I'm going to remind you about who is Dinah. Anybody want to give me a quick summary on who is Dinah?
We're not going into the rape of Dinah, are we?
Of course, that's how we're going to get the line of Joseph. No rape, no pregnancy.
Yeah, and her two brothers get really pissed off and go kill everyone.
Well,
There is a.
How
How many of you have heard the book The Red Tent? It's a book by I gotta look at it. I know where it is. Oh, I can't quite.
Diamond, something.
Diamond, something like
Yeah,
that.
Anita Diamond. Thank you. So she writes an entire book about this story. The basic idea of the story is we're back in the time when Jacob's traveling with his 12 sons, and it turns out he has one daughter. We always forget about her.
Mm-hmm.
And the daughter is Dinah. And she either is captured or falls in love with the prince of a town called Shechem. It's unclear. This is often called the rape of Dinah, but it's unclear whether it's actually a rape. And in Anita Diamond's story, it's more of a love affair than a rape. Anyway, she falls in love with him. She gets pregnant by him, and he wants to marry her. And Jacob's oldest sons, I think it's Reuven and
Simeon and Levi.
Levi.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, they basically tell the people living in Shechem that, yeah, you can marry her and join our gang if you all the men agree to circumcise themselves. And so they do. And I do know this not from personal experience, but from having worked with men who have been circumcised as an adult, that it is a very painful recovery. The surgery itself, these days under anesthesia, no problem, but the recovery itself is painful, much more so than when an 8-day-old baby is circumcised, because at 8 days, the nerve endings and the blood flow have not yet really reached the foreskin. So mainly now, while these men are recovering from their circumcision, Jacob's sons go out and kill them all. Lovely story. Probably not one you read in Bible school on Sunday morning. So now, but Dinah's pregnant, and the Bible, I don't think the Bible even mentions Dinah again. She disappears into history. I think the rape is mentioned again when Jacob is making predictions about his sons. So Asenath is the daughter of Dinah. So Targum Pseudo Jonathan, 7th century CE, solves this problem by presenting Asenath as the daughter of Joseph's sister Dinah. What in the world is Targum Pseudo Jonathan? The word Targum is an Aramaic word for translation. What's going on here is, just like we like to read the Bible in translation, namely reading it in English, and going back a few many hundred years, more than 1,000 years, when most people were speaking Aramaic, you're going to get various translations into Aramaic of the text. And one of the fun things about these translations is they are much more than what we think of when we think of a translation. When we think of a translation, we're thinking, how can I most accurately what it says of the text in language A and present it in language B? In the Targums, depending on the author would feel free to go on and explain things which are not in the biblical text at all. So here's an example. And he gave him this. So this is now commenting on the idea of Pharaoh giving Asenath to Joseph. He gave him Asenath, who Dinah had born to Shechem, and the wife of Potiphar, the prince of Tanis, had brought up to be his wife. So extending this exegetical or interpretational tradition, Midrash Agadah, another Jewish midrash, now 12th century, so only 500 years later, fills in the details of how Asenath reaches Egypt and is adopted into Potiphar's house. But wasn't she Dinah's daughter? We have heard that when Jacob, our father, came from Shechem, he wrote on a golden plate everything that happened to him, to them, when Shechem, son of Hamor, when Dinah gave birth to Asenath, he put the plate on her neck and set her down by the wall of Egypt. I have a little trouble understanding the plate on her neck. I don't know, I actually don't get that, but maybe hung it around her neck like a big jewel. That day, Potiphar went out for a stroll with his lads, and they got to the wall. They heard the sound of a crying newborn. He said to his lads, "Bring me the child." He saw the plate and the incidents described upon it. Potiphar said to his slaves, "This girl is the daughter of important people. Bring her to my home and get a nurse." And since he brought her up, this is referred to as his daughter. Centuries later, Greek-speaking Jews handled the problem of Asenath's identity in a very different way. By the way, does this story remind you of anything else in the Bible?
Yeah, Tamar.
Joseph and Pharaoh's court.
Oh, so Cheryl, you said Tamar. Which Tamar?
Tamar and Amnon in Samuel.
In what way does it remind you of?
Because again, it's the rape and
okay. So an illegitimate sexual contact leads to an important person. Okay. I was thinking of somebody strolling by and hears a crying newborn and decides to bring up that newborn in their own house.
Moses.
So it really reminded me of Moses. This article. Sorry, somebody was going to say something.
No, that's what I said Joseph, but I meant Moses. Sorry.
Oh, okay.
This
article is going to go on for several pages, but basically it's going to tell in great detail the story that we heard before, that Asenath worshipped an idol, and she was very stuck up and wouldn't go out with any guy. She was a virgin, and was much taller and more attractive and beautiful than all the other virgins in the land. I'm just going to highlight some of it. The report of her beauty spread throughout the land, and as far as the ends of the inhabited world, so all the sons of notable men, the sons of satraps, I guess the only other time I ever heard of satrap was in the story of Esther. Sons of all the kings, they all wanted to court her, but she wouldn't accept anyone until slam, bam, thank you, ma'am, she sees Joseph and is just knocked off her camel. And then her father is trying to set her up with Joseph and says, he's God-fearing, self-controlled, chaste like you, a man adept at wisdom and knowledge. The Spirit of God is upon him. The favor of the Lord is within him. Come then, my child, I will hand you over to him as a wife, and you'll be his bride, and he will be your bridegroom forever. And of course now, I think at first she doesn't want to marry him, saying he's a foreigner, he's enslaved, he was a runaway, he was thrown in prison, but wasn't he the shepherd's son from Canaan? and caught in the act of sleeping with his female master and so on. Anyway, this just tells the story in great detail. Finally, she has a change of heart. She is struck with love, and now she regrets that she didn't accept him. But what she does basically is repent, smash all of her idols, and change her heart. Whoops, I don't know what happened here. She has a change of heart, and now Joseph doesn't want her. So Joseph says, is it not fitting for a God-fearing man who praises the living God with his mouth and eats blessed bread of life, drinks a blessed cup of immortality, anoints himself with blessed oil of incorruption, to kiss a strange woman who praises dead and dumb idols with her mouth and eats the bread of strangulation, whatever that is, from their table, drinks a cup of treachery from their drink offering, and anoints herself with oil of destruction. And as those of us who were raised as nice Jewish boys, you know, this is always what went through our mind when we managed to get a date with a non-Jew. But then, of course, she abandons her gods and asks God to have mercy on her, and they all live happily ever after. It's long though. It's really too long to read in this format, but I'll just highlight again the name of the article. So it's in Torah.com. Just look for Joseph and Asnath. And maybe I'll try and attach it to the email I send out later tonight. So this is a great example of midrash. So the answer is she was really Jewish according to rabbinic standards. How is that possible? Because biologically she was the daughter of Dinah. And so since the mother was Jewish, she's Jewish. She didn't know it, but once she met a nice Jewish boy like Joseph, she rejected all the idols and became Jewish, or she converted, or whatever. So, and we can all relax and not worry about poor Joseph's offspring. Les.
Is a midrash similar to a parable? In the Christian Bible, Jesus talks in parables. Are they
well, the rabbis love to talk of parables. So yeah, I would say a midrash can be, yes, similar to a parable. What I would say the difference is a parable is sort of a metaphoric way of explaining something. So, for example, it usually begins with the Hebrew words alma doma. What does this resemble? So, for example, you have here's an issue which pops up in the Talmud all the time. How could we Jews be sent off into exile and still claim to have a good relationship with God? That's a problem. So the rabbis say, here's a parable. To what does this resemble? A king who had a son who disobeyed him, but the son, and so the king, in his anger, sent his son into exile. But the king so loved his son that the king went into exile so he could keep contact with his son. So God, in God's righteous anger, because we disobeyed God, kicked us out of the land of Israel, but God came with us into our diaspora. So a parable is sort of a device for explaining something. I would say a midrash, and you may have heard me say this before, comes from the verb lidrosh, which means to draw out. So the midrash takes some text and digs deeply into the text to draw out something that solves the problem. So what's going on here is, this is a good example, the problem is, are Ephraim and Manasseh really Jewish? And what the Midrash says is, one way that they could be Jewish is if Asnath were really a descendant of Dinah. So I would say that's not a parable, but it is a midrash. I don't know if that helps. I can give you another
I
Great
can
example.
ask you again.
I'm sorry?
I can ask you again. I'm joking. No, you
Is
explain.
is the red tent midrash?
Yes. So the red tent is what many people call modern midrash, and some people criticize it because it draws things out which aren't anywhere near the Bible.
Yeah.
But I would say that's an example of modern midrash. I'm going to give you another example of parable because I use it all the time, actually, at every funeral. And in the book of Ecclesiastes, Kohelet says that a good name is better than fine oil. Tov Shem Mishem Tov, and the day of death is better than the day of birth. Okay, so there's something puzzling, right? Kohelet, traditionally thought to be the wise King Solomon, is saying the day of death is better than the day of birth. So the rabbis seek to explain it by means of a midrash. And not midrash, sorry. Oh, no, I'm getting confused.
Parable.
Parable, right. Which in Hebrew is a mashal. They explain it by a mashal. And the mashal is they imagined a port with ships leaving and ships coming in. And for the ship leaving, there's this great bon voyage party, and people are celebrating, and there's, music and wine and confetti and everything else. And for the ship that's coming in, yeah, some people are there to greet it, but no great celebration. And a man on the port says, this doesn't make sense to me. The ship that's leaving, who knows what kind of dangers it will face. Calm seas, trouble seas. I always point out the news of recent years and the news of 100 years ago point out that not all cruises end happily. But the ship that has completed its journey and come back successfully to its home port, that's really what we should be celebrating. And so the parable goes on. It is with a human life. When a baby is born, we all celebrate, and it's natural and appropriate to do so. But in point of fact, nobody knows what kind of life this new life will lead. But when someone has come back to their home port after a journey of, and then I, insert the age of the person who just died, from 75 to 105, and now we know what a wonderful life this person has led. In the midst of our sadness of their passing, we can celebrate the amazing life that they have led. So that's a parable. That's a mashal, not a midrash. We're not digging into the biblical text anymore to find out something about it. We're using sort of a teaching to explain the text. Okay, I hope that's helpful. But it's a very good question, though. That's the difference between a parable and in the New Testament. Those of you familiar with the New Testament, it's filled with parables. And, I actually told this, I can't remember which parable I told. I spoke to, well over 1,000 Catholic educators last weekend. And I gave an example of a parable, a Jewish parable. And I asked them to some laughter. I said, have you ever heard of the idea of rabbis telling parables? Does this sound familiar to any of you? And of course, to all of them, because the New Testament is filled with Jesus's parables. But it was a very rabbinic form of teaching.
Rabbi, is the good shepherd, the
Samaritan?
Good Samaritan, is that a parable or a true story?
It is a Christian parable.
That's what I thought.
Let me put it this way. It's a New Testament parable. It's also many hospitals. Right.
Now, because supposedly the Samaritans, from what I heard, were not good people. And this just happened.
They had, and I don't know the details, but basically they had left the world of Judaism. So they were not good Jews, but I think the main point of the Good Samaritan is a person, even though he might not be a good Jew, he might be a great person.
Thank you.
Okay, so that's it for this subject. I will send out the video. And what I'm thinking of doing, unless I hear strenuous objections, we'll see. I am thinking of next week we're not going to have a class because I'll be traveling. And I would like to have an extended discussion of science and religion. But there is a selfish reason for this. I am very seriously toying with the idea of writing a book on science and religion. And it's based on, and it's going to be very much a dialogue, question and answer, not, a scholarly work of physics or theology, but kind of the way I understand the relationship of science and religion. And I will find it personally helpful to work with you on that and hear your questions, and that will actually help me with my project. So that's my plan. So not next week, but the following weeks as we go along. And of course, I will, I'll record them and they will be available. And in the email I'm sending out tonight, I'm going to send you a PDF of all the PowerPoint slides that I will be using in that talk.
Are we meeting on Wednesday or no?
We are not meeting this Wednesday. So we're not meeting this coming Wednesday. We are not meeting at all next week.
Okay.
So that's 2 Wednesdays we're missing and 1 Monday we're missing.
Okay,
But I
okay.
will keep you advised by email. And
Okay,
Alana, yeah.
Great.
Oh, yeah. Is your previous book still available?
Say again? Oh, my previous book? Yes, you can find it. You can order it through my website, and you can get a signed copy, signed by me. And it's also available actually through the publisher, the Paulus Press. And you can also find used copies online. Yes, the answer is it is very much available and actually still in print. Every now and again, I order another 100 books from them and wind up giving away many and selling many. And I joke that if you truly want to get a rare copy, you should order it from the Paulus Press because it's not signed. There are probably as many signed copies out there as there are unsigned copies. It's probably 50-50. Okay, so thank you all, and I'll see you in not next week, but the week after.
The science class is just Mondays, right? Not Monday.
Yeah, it'll be just Mondays, yes. And it will also, of course, be recorded. And actually, if you go to my website classes, you will see a version I taught several years ago. And there'll be some familiarity. But how many of you have studied science and religion with me? No? Okay, good. Because I know I've taught it a lot, but it's been quite a while. So that'll be helpful. It's really helpful for me to actually go through this again, and it'll help me prepare what I'm working on. So thank you all. Have a good week, and
Thank you.
well, I'll see you when I see you. Take care.
Thank
All
you.
right. Have a good time. Where are you going?
Well, we are going to Puerto Vallarta.
Have a great time.
Went there first for a wedding. I think I've done 2 or 3 weddings in Puerto Vallarta, but Sonia and I just love it, and we're going just to enjoy. And now, after we made that booking, it turns out I probably have another wedding there in about 6 months. So anyway, like Puerto Vallarta, like Mexico.
Rabbi, just something to tell you. I think, I do a lot of euthanasias, and after we put the animal down, I always talk to the people and I say, cherish and celebrate the life and the beautiful memories you have, because they're crying and they're saying, and I said, just think of how wonderful you love them enough to let go and not have them suffer. And that usually brings a lot of comfort to them. So what you're saying about celebrate the life, don't cry about the loss, celebrate what was, and try to enjoy the blessing of that person.
Oh, I absolutely think it's both. I always say the pain of losing someone
the pain
is the price we pay for the love. If trees don't cry over dead saplings, or saplings don't cry over dead trees, presumably. But living, creatures are affected by the loss. So it is absolutely both. And my understanding is the word euthanasia comes from, I think, from the Greek meaning a good death.
Yeah, and then I have to be careful. I had to put a dog under and do a dental today, and they said, "You're going to put it to sleep?" And I said, "That's not a word we use in veterinary medicine because that means euthanasia." So I said, "No, we're putting them under anesthesia." So but you don't use that word, sleep, ever. And